I didn't expect a sprained lower back to expose the quiet fractures forming inside my life. But pain has a strange way of revealing everything you try to hide. When my doctor sent me to physical therapy, I thought it would be a routine inconvenience, an hour of stretching, a few guided movements, and then straight back to a relationship that felt more like a ghost town than a partnership. Instead, I walked into a place that made me confront how empty I'd become, and the person who opened that truth was someone I barely knew, Evan, the therapy assistant with an easy smile that almost felt like a hand on my shoulder every time it showed up beside me. The therapy clinic smelled faintly of eucalyptus and something clean, clinical without being cold. I walked in with a limp that embarrassed me more than it should have. I kept telling myself it was just overuse, just stress, just a temporary setback. But deep down, I knew the ache wasn't entirely physical. I had been carrying emotional weight so long I couldn't distinguish where the strain ended and the loneliness began. Evan approached me with a clipboard, but he didn't look at it until after he looked at me. "Graham, right?" he asked, pronouncing my name with the kind of patience that caught me off guard. His voice was gentle, steady, the kind that slowed your thoughts without you noticing. I nodded and tried not to shift too obviously from the discomfort that flared every time I moved the wrong way. He guided me to the therapy mat, explaining the program in a way that made the process feel less mechanical, less like something being done to me and more like something we'd worked through together. His attentiveness contrasted sharply with the emotional absence I'd grown used to at home. My boyfriend, Caleb, had spent the past few months drowning himself in work and excuses, and somewhere in that ocean, I had become invisible. The memory stung as Evan helped me sit down carefully, asking if anything worsened when I bent forward. I tried to focus on his instructions, not on the echo of neglect that followed me everywhere. The first exercises were simple, guided breathing, light mobility work, small adjustments to help me realign how I carried my weight. Evan's presence was calm, almost grounding. He paid attention to every subtle shift, noticing things I didn't realize I was doing. When the pain flared unexpectedly, I flinched and he responded swiftly, placing a steadying hand just above my shoulder blade. "Hey, you're okay. Just breathe with me," he said, matching his inhalation to mine, counting softly. His closeness startled me not because he was touching me, but because he was there, fully, attentively, without the distracted half-presence I lived with at home. I told myself it was nothing, just kindness, just professional care. But the truth was simpler and harder. I had forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely noticed. Halfway through the session, a small accident happened when I lost balance, shifting my weight during a stretch. My foot slipped, and a sharp bolt of pain shot my spine. I grabbed the edge of the mat instinctively, and Evan reacted before I could fall forward, catching my elbow to stabilize me. His grip was firm but not forceful, a steady anchor that kept the pain from escalating. "You good? Don't move too fast," he murmured, steadying me as I tried to regain control of my breath. I nodded, embarrassed at how vulnerable the moment felt. He didn't make it worse. He didn't joke. He didn't act annoyed. His expression softened, and he adjusted the exercise, making sure I didn't push too far. It was a kind of attentiveness that felt rare, too rare for someone like me who had spent months feeling like an afterthought. When the session ended, I checked my phone to see if Caleb had arrived to pick me up like he promised. Nothing. No call. No message. Just silence. I wasn't surprised, but the disappointment still landed like a weight in my chest. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, hoping for something that never came. "You waiting on a ride?" Evan asked as he wiped down the equipment nearby. "Yeah," I said, try to sound casual even as my frustration simmered beneath the surface. "He should be here. Just running late, I guess." Evan nodded, but his eyes flicked briefly to my phone, then back to me in a way that told me he understood more than I admitted. "No rush," he said. "You can stay inside until they show. We're closing soon, but I'm not heading out right away." There was again the quiet gentleness I didn't realize I'd been starving for. Minutes turned into nearly half an hour. Caleb still didn't show. The clinic lights dimmed one by one as the last therapist locked up, leaving only the soft glow from the waiting area. Evan stayed nearby, organizing equipment, wiping down surfaces, lingering in a way that didn't feel forced. When he finally walked over, he sat in the chair across from me, elbows resting loosely on his knees. "You okay?" he asked. No judgment, no assumptions, just a question that felt like a hand opening a door. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just long day." He smiled softly. "I get it. I've had those too." He said it simply, not prying, not pushing, just an invitation to feel seen without the pressure of explaining myself. When Caleb finally texted, a short, half-hearted apology followed by "I got caught up, take a ride home," something inside me sank. I tucked the phone away before Evan could see how quickly I shoved the disappointment down. "Looks like I'll just grab a ride," I said with a forced shrug. Evan nodded, but he held my gaze for a second longer than expected. "Well, I'll see you at your next session. Same time." His voice carried something I couldn't name yet. Not intimacy, not flirtation, but a warmth that contrasted too starkly with the coldness I returned home to every night. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Same time." Walking out of the clinic, I felt lighter in some strange way, even with the ache still in my back. The session was supposed to help my body heal, but instead, it left me questioning something deeper, something I could feel rising like a tide I wasn't prepared for. I shouldn't have felt anything. I knew that, but the truth sat quietly beneath the surface, steady and undeniable. For the first time in months, someone made me feel visible, and I didn't know what to do with that. Evan became a constant in my week before I realized I had started building small pieces of my routine around him. I told myself it was only because physical therapy required consistency, that progress depended on showing up. But deep down, there was a quieter truth I wasn't ready to name. Every time I walked into the clinic, the air felt different, as if the space absorbed something heavy from my shoulders. And every time Evan greeted me with that gentle, knowing smile, something inside me loosened just a little more. The second week of therapy began with a simple observation on his part. "You're moving better," he said as he guided me to the mat. "Pain any easier today?" He asked it casually, but with an attentiveness that made me feel like my answer mattered. "A bit," I replied, still stiff in the mornings. "We'll work with that," he said. "Let's go slow today." He always said we, not you, and I found myself noticing the small difference more than I should have. Evan started the session with warm-up movements, gentle lumbar rotations, controlled breathing, and stretches that required subtle adjustments. His hands were steady when he corrected my posture, careful and patient. It was impossible not to contrast those moments with the disconnection waiting for me at home. With Caleb, the air felt thick and distant, filled with conversations that died too quickly and silences that stretched too long. At the clinic, the silence felt different, lighter, gentler, filled with unspoken understanding rather than absence. As Evan guided me through a difficult hip flexor stretch, a sharp pinch surged through my lower back. I tensed, face tightened before I could hide it. He paused immediately. "Stop," he said softly. "Don't fight through pain like that." He crouched beside me, eyes searching my expression. Where exactly was it? I placed a hand near the right side of my spine. Evan nodded and adjusted the angle, easing me back into a safer position. His voice remained calm, a steady anchor as he explained how the muscles were reacting and why I needed to trust the process. "Your body's still guarding itself," he said. "That'll change. You just need time." Time. The word lingered with an unexpected heaviness. I had given Caleb years of patience, compromise, and quiet endurance, and still we had somehow drifted so far apart we barely lived in the same emotional space anymore. Yet here, in a few sessions, Evan had managed to make me feel more understood than my partner had in months. It wasn't right, but it was real, and pretending otherwise felt like lying to myself. When the session ended, Evan handed me a cold pack wrapped in a towel. "Hold this for a few minutes before leaving," he said. "You pushed harder than you think." "I can handle it." I tried to joke. He smiled. "Sure you can. But let's not make my job harder." The way he said it made something warm flicker in my chest, something I tried to dismiss before it grew roots. I left the clinic expecting Caleb to check in, even out of obligation. Instead, my phone stayed silent until later that evening, when a brief message finally appeared. Working late. Don't wait up. No greeting. No question about how therapy went. Just another line in the long story of our fading connection. I stare at the message longer than I should have, telling myself it didn't matter, that I shouldn't expect anything different. But the disappointment still settled like a weight I didn't want to carry. That night, I lay awake thinking about the contrast, about how Evan remembered small details I barely mentioned, yet Caleb forgot the important things without hesitation. I tried to push the thoughts aside, tried to stay loyal to the man I had chosen years ago, but something was shifting inside me. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was a simple, painful realization that I missed being cared for. The next therapy session deepened that realization. Evan greeted me with a quick glance, immediately noticing the strain in my shoulders. "Tough day," he asked. You could say that. He didn't pry. Instead, he eased us into a slower routine, emphasizing stability exercises. At one point, while guiding my stance, he placed a hand lightly on my lower back to help me engage the right muscles. I felt a subtle warm spread under his touch. Not romantic, not inappropriate, but grounding. It reminded me how long it had been since anyone touched me with intention rather than duty. During a breathing exercise, I faltered again, wincing when my back tensed reflexively. Evan knelt beside me, demonstrating the movement with a calm precision that made it easier to follow. "You're doing well," he said quietly, "even if it doesn't feel like it." Something in his tone made my throat tighten unexpectedly. I nodded, trying to swallow the emotion rising in me. I blamed the pain, the fatigue, everything but the truth, that his presence gave me a sense of reassurance I'd forgotten I needed. After the session, while I sat icing my back again, Evan lingered nearby, rearranging equipment. "You're progressing faster than most," he said without looking up. "But don't rush yourself. Healing doesn't happen all at once." Healing. The word echoed through me with a meaning that had nothing to do with muscles or ligaments. The clinic was quieter that day, so when Evan finished organizing, he sat on the mat beside me, not too close, but close enough that I felt the space between us shift. "If anything gets worse at home, call the clinic," he said. "I mean it. That's what we're here for." I nodded, absorbing the sincerity in his voice. It was strange how natural it felt to sit there with him, how unforced the silence was. When I finally stood to leave, he gathered my things before I could reach for them, holding them out with a gentle smile. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Yeah," I said too quickly. "Same time." Outside the clinic, the sky was warm with fading light. For a moment, I found myself standing there, inhaling deeply as though I needed to reset my entire chest. Something was happening, quiet, slow, but unmistakable. I wasn't falling for Evan, not in the way people fear or rush to judge. But I was beginning to feel alive again, and that was dangerous in its own way. I walked home realizing that every session with him was peeling back layers I thought were permanent. Layers of loneliness, silence, and emotional neglect. I wasn't sure where this path was leading or what would break first, my back pain or the fragile piece of my relationship with Caleb that still held on. But as I reached my door, one thought pressed itself into my mind with painful clarity. For the first time in months, I didn't dread the next day, and I knew exactly why. The shift between Caleb and me wasn't sudden. It was a sort of quiet unraveling you only recognize once the threads are already scattered at your feet. But by the time the third week of therapy began, the distance between us had grown, so wide it felt like we were walking on opposite ends of a bridge that no longer existed. Every morning he left earlier. Every night he returned later. And every conversation dissolved before it had the chance to become something meaningful. I kept trying to reach for him through the fog, but he kept slipping away like a reflection on water, close enough to see, too far to touch. That tension followed me into the clinic the next afternoon. Evan looked up the second I stepped inside, and something in his expression shifted with concern. "You okay?" he asked gently. "You look a little worn." I tried to shrug it off. "Rough day. Nothing dramatic." He studied me for a moment longer, reading past the surface the way he always did, then nodded toward the mat. "All right, let's take it slow today." But the weight of everything at home didn't stay outside the door. It clung to me, made my movement stiff, made my breathing shallow. Evan noticed every hesitation, every misalignment, every time I flinched without meaning to. Halfway through the session, during a balance exercise that required me to shift my weight onto my injured side, I wavered and nearly lost my footing. Evan stepped forward, steadying me with both hands on my arms. "Hey, breathe," he said quietly. "You're holding everything too tight." "I'm fine," I muttered, though I wasn't sure which part of me I was lying about. "Graham," he said in a softer tone, "you're allowed to be honest." The word struck deeper than he could have known. Honesty had become something fragile at home, something I offered that never landed anywhere but the floor. Caleb either brushed it aside or met it with irritation, turning every vulnerable moment into something I regretted. Evan let go of my arm slowly, making sure I was balanced before stepping back. He adjusted the exercise to something less demanding, but his eyes stayed on me with a quiet awareness that made it impossible to hide behind small talk. "Do you want to keep going?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I need to." He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. We moved into a stretch that required me to lie on my side while he guided the angle of my hip. His touch was professional, precise, but there was something undeniably grounded about the way he instructed me. Patient, steady, always attentive to the smallest detail. I tried focusing on the mechanics of the movement, but the thoughts I'd been avoiding all morning kept resurfacing. The night before, Caleb had come home long after midnight. I had waited up, hoping we could talk about the growing silence between us. When he finally walked in, tired and irritated, the conversation went sideways before it even began. "You don't make this easy," he had said sharply when I asked why we barely spoke anymore. "I'm exhausted, Graham. I don't need another problem the minute I step inside." "I'm not trying to be a problem," I had whispered, but he was already heading to the bedroom, ending the exchange with, "Then stop acting like one." Those words had stayed with me, slicing deeper every time I replayed them. And now, lying on a therapy mat while Evan gently corrected my posture, I found myself fighting the instinct to apologize for taking up space, for needing something, for hurting. At the end of the stretch, Evan sat back on his heels and studied my face thoughtfully. "You're somewhere else today," he observed. I exhaled slowly. "Just tired." "M.A.M.," he hummed, unconvinced. "Tired looks different. This looks like you're carrying something heavy." I closed my eyes, unsure whether to deflect or surrender. His voice, steady but never intrusive, made the second option feel strangely possible. "Things at home aren't great," I finally admitted. He didn't lean in. He didn't probe. He simply nodded as though acknowledging a truth I had whispered without sound. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. That kind of weight makes the body tense without you noticing. "It's more than tension," I said, surprised at myself for the honesty. "It feels like I'm disappearing." Evan's expression softened in a way that made my chest tighten. "People who care about you shouldn't let you feel like that." I inhaled sharply, the words hitting a nerve. "He doesn't mean to," I said weakly, though even as I spoke, doubt crept like a tide I couldn't push back. Evan didn't challenge me. He just held my gaze for a moment, offering a kind of understanding I hadn't felt in far too long. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet conviction. "You deserve someone who notices when you're hurting." The air between us changed, subtle, fragile, charged with something neither of us acknowledged aloud. Not desire, not longing, just a dangerous realization that someone finally saw me clearly. The rest of the session passed more gently. Evan adjusted the exercises, opting for slow movements that emphasized control over intensity. Even though we barely spoke after that, the silence felt full, not empty. It was as though something had been named without being spoken, something delicate that neither of us was reckless enough to mishandle. When the session ended, I sat with an ice pack again while Evan wiped down the equipment. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the overhead lights. I could feel his presence nearby, and it comforted me more than I wanted to admit. As I stood to leave, Evan handed me my water bottle, his fingers brushing mine lightly, an unintentional touch, brief and insignificant on the surface, yet something about it made my breath catch. He didn't react, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a momentary shift that mirrored something in my own chest. Take care of yourself, he said, voice low but sincere. You're carrying more than just an injury. I swallowed, unsure how to respond without revealing too much. I'll try. Outside, the late afternoon light felt muted, as though the world had dimmed to reflect the confusion twisting inside me. I walked slowly, each step accompanied by the echo of Evan's words and the memory of Caleb's coldness. The contrast was sharp enough to hurt. By the time I reached home, I knew something inside me had shifted irreversibly. I didn't know where the line was, or if I had already crossed it emotionally, but I understood one thing with painful clarity. My heart was reaching for someone who wasn't reaching back. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I could keep pretending that wasn't happening. By the time the final week of therapy arrived, the divide in my life had grown so stark it felt like I was living in two different realities, one where I existed as a shadow beside Caleb, and another where Evan's quiet presence reminded me I was still capable of feeling something deeper, something human. I tried to pretend nothing was changing, that I wasn't drawn toward the gentleness Evan offered so naturally, but every day made it clearer. I was coming undone in places I had once believed were solid. The tension at home had thickened into something suffocating. Caleb and I moved through the apartment like strangers occupying borrowed space, speaking only when necessary, staying on opposite sides of every room. I kept waiting for him to notice the distance, to ask, to care, but he didn't. And the more invisible I felt, the harder it became to deny the quiet spark that had begun to form each time Evan spoke my name with warmth Caleb hadn't used in months. On the morning of my last scheduled therapy session, Caleb stood in the kitchen scrolling through his phone, barely glancing up when I entered. "You need anything before I go?" I asked, knowing the answer, hoping for something more anyway. "No," he said flatly. "I'll be late tonight." It wasn't just what he said. It was the tone, the disinterest woven through every syllable, the unspoken message that my presence made no difference. I nodded silently, grabbed my keys, and left before the ache in my chest betrayed how deeply his indifference still cut. The clinic felt like a refuge the moment I stepped inside. Evan noticed me instantly, his expression shifting with concern. "Rough morning?" he asked. "Something like that." I answered, my voice thinner than I intended. He didn't push. He never did. Instead, he guided me to the mat with a soft, steady reassurance that made the knot in my chest loosen slightly. The exercises were more advanced now. Stability drills, strength work, control mobility. Evan stayed close, offering small adjustments and quiet encouragements. "You're stronger than when you started," he said at one point. "Your posture is more balanced. You're trusting your body again." His words warmed me more than they should have. "Feels like I'm still holding a lot together." "Then let some of it go," he said, almost whispering. "Just for this hour. Let yourself breathe." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But letting go meant confronting the truth I've been avoiding. About my relationship, about my loneliness, about the connection slowly building between Evan and me despite every effort to keep it contained. Halfway through the session, during a core stability exercise, I faltered, my balance slipped, and I reached instinctively for support. Evan caught my arm, steadying me with practiced ease, but something in the moment felt different, charged, fragile, unavoidable. "You're okay," he murmured, his fingers firm but gentle around my wrist. I met his eyes, and for a second, everything stilled. There was no mat beneath me, no clinic walls, no noise, just a quiet hum of something real, something neither of us had intended but both of us felt. Evan looked away first, gently lowering my arm as if the contact had become too heavy. "Let's take a break," he said, clearing his throat. His voice was steady, but there was a flicker of something unspoken in it, something careful. We sat near the edge of the mat, not speaking at first, just breathing through the tension neither of us knew how to name. I opened my mouth to break the silence, but Evan spoke before I could. "Graham, can I be honest with you?" His voice trembled slightly, the first crack I'd heard in his composure. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Please." He exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I don't want to cross any lines. I don't want to make things harder for you. But it's been difficult, keeping things strictly professional." He paused, swallowing. "I care about you. more than I'm supposed to. The words hit me like a breath I didn't know I'd been waiting for, warm, terrifying, painfully true. I felt my heart tighten, not with guilt, but with recognition. You haven't done anything wrong, I said softly. You've just seen me, when no one else has. Evan looked at me then, his eyes filled with something tender and conflicted. I don't want to be someone who comes between you and your life. My life, I echoed, a hollow laugh escaping me. Evan, my life is falling apart. I'm trying to hold on to something that isn't even reaching back. The confession came out before I could stop it, raw and trembling. Evan's face softened with a mixture of understanding and pain. You deserve more than that, he whispered. You deserve someone who meets you halfway. For a moment, neither of us moved. The distance between us felt delicate, like a thin thread ready to snap with the slightest pull. I didn't touch him. He didn't reach for me. But something passed between us anyway. Quiet, powerful, dangerous. The session ended with a silence that felt heavier than any words we could have exchanged. Evan handed me my ice pack, his fingers brushing mine briefly. The touch was small, accidental, but it sent a pulse through me I couldn't ignore. This doesn't have to be goodbye, he said quietly, even if therapy is over. I searched his face, finding only sincerity, not expectation, not pressure, just a gentle invitation to stop living half a life. I don't know what comes next, I admitted, but I know I can't keep pretending nothing's wrong. Evan nodded. Whatever you choose, just choose yourself first. Those words stayed with me as I left the clinic. The late afternoon light casting long shadows across the parking lot. For the first time in a long time, the future felt uncertain, but not in the way that frightened me. It felt open, like something I could shape rather than endure. As I walked toward home, my phone buzzed with a message from Caleb. We need to talk tonight. A familiar dread tugged at my stomach, but beneath it was something else, a quiet strength I hadn't felt before. Maybe I was ready to face the truth. Maybe I was finally ready to stop disappearing inside a life that no longer held me. Whatever the conversation with Caleb brought, one thing was certain. Evan hadn't replaced my broken relationship. He'd simply reminded me I deserved one that wasn't breaking at all.